On a sunny Friday afternoon in June 2013, Heather Backstrom and Meryl Anderson, two mothers who live near Bellingham, Washington, decided to give their young children a treat and take them to Birch Bay water slides for some splash and play. The two women could never have imagined that this small trip that day would help solve one of the greatest unsolved mysteries of all time. The murder of Mandy Stavik over Thanksgiving weekend in 1989 went unsolved for more than 2 decades, until this chance conversation between Heather and Meryl led police to the killer. This is the story of Mandy Stavik. Mandy Stavik was highly accomplished honor student at the Mount Baker High School in Deming, Washington. She played both varsity basketball and varsity softball and also ran track. She was fluent in sign language and also could speak Japanese. She played three instruments: clarinet, flute, and saxophone in the school band. She was brave, independent, and driven. Mandy Stavik's family had come from Alaska. Her parents had divorced, and her mother, Mary Stavik, had brought her three children, Lee, Mandy, and Molly, to settle down in Acme. An older son named Brent had been shot 17 times and killed years earlier in Anchorage in 1975. To this day, the murder remains unsolved. After graduating high school in 1989, 18-year-old Mandy went to Central Washington University. Her initial career goal was to become a commercial pilot, but she was beginning to rethink her plans by the middle of her first semester of college. That November, Mandy returned to her family home in Clipper, Washington, just outside small town of Acme, for her Thanksgiving break. The day after Thanksgiving, November 24, 1989, Mandy decided to go for a run and left her house at around 2:30 in the afternoon. She usually ran with her mother, Mary Stavik, who biked alongside her, but on that particular day, she took only the family's German Shepherd. Her mother could not accompany her as her sister was visiting. Mandy was accompanied on the run by family dog, a German Shepherd named Kyra. Mandy's route for her daily runs took her down the street. Her family's house was on Strand Road. She would run down to where the road ends at the Nooksack River and then turn around to run home. Mandy's brother Lee had been visiting his friend Jeremy at the Andersons' house, which was about halfway between their house and Highway 9 down the Strand Road. While he was there, he saw his sister running by. She was less than a mile away from her home, but she never arrived. 2 hours later, Kyra, the family dog who accompanied Mandy, arrived back at the house without Mandy and was visibly upset. Mary Stavik's first instinct was to call Mandy's boyfriend, Rick Sender, to see if he knew where she was. Rick told Mandy's mom that he had not met Mandy that day. She then decided to call the sheriff and everyone she knew in the area to begin the search for Mandy. The residents of Acme started looking immediately for Mandy. She had been wearing a light colored sweatshirt, teal green sweatpants, light blue running shoes with purple stripe, and was listening to a Walkman when she vanished. The people searched on foot, on horseback, and on all terrain. A local tracker tried to work with Kyra, the German Shepherd, hoping that she would lead them back to Mandy. However, Kyra would cower in fear upon stepping off the porch of the family home. Kyra was an older dog, but still very protective of her family. She may have been kicked or hit when she tried to defend Mandy against an assailant, resulting in change in her behavior when she arrived home. On November 26th, a search team covering small side roads discovered a pair of green sweatpants. Mary Stavik did not believe that the sweatpants the search team found belonged to her daughter, but they were still submitted to crime lab for analysis. The lab tests would eventually show that the sweatpants were unrelated to the case. The following day, on November 27, 1989, Mandy's body was finally found. A local fire department had been searching the Nooksack River in search of Mandy's body. They located Mandy's body in the south forks of the river, caught up in some debris 6 miles away from her home. She was wearing only socks and shoes. Her clothing and the Walkman she had been using on her run had never been found to this date. After the discovery of Mandy's body, an autopsy was performed to determine the cause of her death. The autopsy revealed that Mandy had been raped and she had died from asphyxia by drowning. There were no signs of struggle on the river bank near where she was found, and the water was also very shallow in that stretch of the river. Mandy had worked as a lifeguard during her high school, suggesting she was a very good swimmer. These factors led investigators to believe that Mandy had not been conscious when she went into the river. This was further supported by a wound on top of her head. The medical examiner believed that Mandy was attacked on the head by the assailant, which had made her unconscious. Mandy also had numerous scratches and lacerations on her leg as she had to run through the thorny blackberry bushes that were common in the area while not wearing pants. Mandy was loved by everyone in the community and was quite popular in her community. When she was reported missing, almost every resident in Acme volunteered to help find Mandy. More than 1,000 people attended Mandy's memorial service. There was not a church in the area large enough to hold that many people, so the service was held at the high school where Mandy had graduated from. The obvious first suspect in the case was Mandy's boyfriend Rick. In the beginning few months of the investigation, he was interrogated thoroughly. The couple had been dating for 3.5 years, but the relationship was on and off for some of that time. However, Rick was very eager to cooperate with the police. The officers who were investigating the case described him as being extremely forthcoming. His name was eventually cleared of any involvement in the case. In 1989, DNA testing was still a relatively new technique, especially in the criminal justice field. But luckily for this case, Ron Peterson of the Wycombe County Sheriff's Office had just returned from training at the FBI Academy in Quantico, Virginia. He was trained about how DNA could be used by law enforcement. Most state and local crime labs were not equipped at that time to identify and sequence DNA evidence, but the FBI's lab was. Samples from Mandy's body were sent to the FBI lab, and they were able to isolate Mandy's DNA sequence and that of an unknown male. Investigators followed up more than 7,000 leads and tried to connect Mandy's case to other crimes all over the Northwest, but the case still went cold for 20 years. For 20 years, Mandy Stavik's case had no new leads. For 20 years, Mandy was denied of justice. Life went back to normal until 2009. In 2009, Detective Kevin Bow inherited the case, becoming the third person to lead the investigation. His strategy for trying to solve the now 20-year-old case inspired by a famous case in England was simple. Identify all the men living in the area at that time of the murder and test all of their DNA until they found a match. This theoretically could be done as Mandy had lived in a rural area with a small population. In practice, however, it was much more difficult to do. Over the next 4 years, the Wycombe County Sheriff's Office was able to test dozens of DNA samples, but none of them matched the DNA from the crime scene. However, around this time, they were also able to identify a potential new suspect, Timothy Bass. Timothy Bass had lived a few doors down from Stavik's. In 1989, people who knew him then said that he was very quiet and introverted. According to his high school classmates, he barely had any friend and kept to himself. Shortly after Mandy's murder, he moved to a different city and had gotten married just 2 months after her death. By 2013, he and his wife had 3 children and lived in Everson, Washington. The investigators traveled to Everson to speak with Timothy about the case. He claimed not to remember it and even Mandy's name. This made the investigators immediately suspicious of him. Mandy's murder had been major news in her small and previously very safe town. Mandy had also gone to the same high school as Timothy and had been friends with her younger brother, Tom. A witness would later reveal that Timothy had started attending basketball games when Mandy was on the team to watch her play. and was jealous of her relationship with Rick. The witness said that he would often get angry when he saw Mandy and Rick together. Mandy also ran past his house almost every single day when she was not at college. Timothy refused to provide a voluntary DNA sample. The police still wanted to compare Timothy Bass's DNA to the DNA sample from the crime scene. They went to his employer to ask for help. Timothy worked as a local delivery driver for the France bakery outlet. The investigators met with Kim Wagner, who managed the outlet. They told her that they were investigating an employee and wanted access to information about their delivery routes so that they could follow the employee and potentially collect a cigarette butt or some other discarded item with DNA on it. Kim felt she was not in a position to comply with this request and asked the investigators to consult with human resources at their corporate office. The corporate office in turn asked for a subpoena or search warrant to share that information. The authorities asked Timothy for voluntary sample again in 2015, and again he refused. A few years after her conversation with the police, an offhand remark would change Kim Wagner's mind about getting involved in this case. She and her husband were out at a bar talking with a friend about her co-workers. That friend happened to be an acquaintance of Timothy Bass, and the group began discussing his eccentricities. The friend mentioned to Kim that Timothy had lived on the same street as Mandy Stavik when she was killed. Kim then realized that Timothy and Mandy's case must have been the reason the investigators had come to speak with her when authorities returned to try to get information from the bakery outlet again in 2017. Kim confronted them with her suspicions about what they were investigating. She also told them Timothy Bass's assigned delivery route. This information did not immediately help the authorities to get his DNA. He wore gloves, so his DNA was not left on any of the bread he delivered, and he did not smoke. He never discarded cigarette butts. He took his uniform home instead of leaving it in the delivery truck, and he was the bakery's only employee who did not turn his uniform to be laundered by the company. These mannerisms of Timothy made their suspicion even stronger. His conversations with police seemed to have concerned him enough that he carefully guarded any source of DNA that could be covertly collected. Kim Wagner offered to collect the discarded DNA sample from Timothy inside the bakery building. However, police told her that would not be possible. It would be illegal for them to ask a civilian to collect evidence on their behalf. However, on August 10, 2017, Kim Wagner watched as Timothy drank out of a plastic cup and discarded it in a trash can alongside with a can of Coke. After he walked away, Kim decided to collect the items out of the trash and hide them in a bag on her desk. She turned the items over to the police. Kim was so motivated to help in this case because she had been horrified by Mandy's murder and the way she was murdered. Kim was just 19 at the time of the murder, just 1 year older than Mandy. By 2017, Kim also had another reason for wanting the case to be closed. She had a daughter of her own and was haunted by the idea of Mary Stavik never finding who had taken her daughter from her. The evidence Kim provided was submitted to the crime lab for DNA testing. These tests showed that the DNA Timothy Bass left on the cup when he drank from it matched the DNA found inside of Mandy. Timothy Bass was arrested on December 12, 2017 on Mary Stavik's 81st birthday. Wycombe County Sheriff Bill Elfo knocked on her door and told her that an arrest has been finally made in her daughter's case. It was like a gift from God from Mary Stavik on her birthday. Not knowing who killed her daughter and living with the fact that the killer was still roaming free was an unimaginable pain Mary Stavik was going through for 28 years. Following his arrest, Timothy Bass originally stuck to his story he had been giving to the police since 2013 that he did not know Mandy. However, once it became clear to him that the police had somehow gotten his DNA, he changed his story. He now claimed that he had a consensual sexual relationship with Mandy, which is why his DNA was on her body. Timothy claimed that he had met Mandy before she left for college, while he and his father were out for mountain biking. His father has since passed away and could not confirm the story. Timothy said that he and Mandy had been spending time together just talking and eventually began casually having sex. They had sex again when Mandy was home for Thanksgiving. Timothy could not, however, provide any basic information about Mandy, and not one witness was ever found who had seen both of them together. There were no phone calls or letters between Mandy and him. Police did not believe Timothy's new story. Leading up to his trial, Timothy's lawyer tried to get all the DNA evidence excluded. They argued that the police had first obtained their client's DNA illegally because they asked a civilian to gather it for them. The police can legally collect items that someone has thrown away, but they cannot enlist civilians to do it for them. The lawyers argued that because Kim had previously met with the authorities, she was acting on their behalf when she collected the cup in the can from the garbage. Kim Wagner appeared at the hearing and testified that collecting the items had been her idea and she had done it of her own will. It is legal for civilians to turn over potential evidence of any crime that they legally obtained to the authorities. A judge ruled in August of 2018 that Kim had not been acting on behalf of law enforcement when she collected and turned over the items, and the DNA evidence remained admissible. When Timothy went on trial for first-degree murder in May 2019, his defense was based on his claim that he had consensual relationship with Mandy. The presence of his DNA inside of her body was because of his sexual relationship with Mandy, and therefore it meant to nothing. But Timothy had no proof of his relationship with Mandy, and no witness were ever found to prove his claims. However, as the trial progressed, it became more and more evident that this was a false made-up story by Timothy and his lawyers to evade punishment. Timothy's soon-to-be ex-wife, who had been his girlfriend at the time of Mandy's murder, testified that her husband, against whom she had previously applied for an order of protection, had threatened her into providing him with a false alibi for the day of the murder. Timothy tried to use his family members to falsely testify in his favor. It was revealed that when Timothy's family came to visit him in jail after his arrest, and he had slipped on a note in which he asked his mother to lie to the police, telling them that he had been Christmas shopping with her at the day of the murder, which would prove that he was not there at the scene of the crime. He also tried to convince his mother to blame the crime on his dead father, but her mom did not let him. But the most troubling testimony of all came from Timothy's own brother Tom, who was a friend of Mandy in high school. Tom Bass testified that in 2015, after authorities asked Timothy to volunteer a DNA sample for the second time, Timothy had asked him to lie to the police for him. Timothy told his younger brother that he had sex with Mandy the weekend of Thanksgiving. He wanted him to go to the police and say that he also had sex with Mandy. Timothy wanted to make it appear that Mandy, in his terms, was a loose girl and had sex with multiple men, so that the police would believe his story about him having sex with her. Tom, who had been friends with Mandy, refused to go along with the plan. On May 24, 2019, almost 30 years after Mandy's murder, a jury found Timothy Bass guilty of first-degree murder. After less than a day of deliberation, Mandy Stavik and the rest of Mandy's family was in the courtroom when the verdict was read. On July 2nd, the judge imposed the maximum sentence of 320 months, or for almost 27 years, in prison. Timothy is planning to appeal his conviction. Mandy Stavik was one of the best students in her high school. In her remembrance, every year since 1990, a scholarship has been awarded in Mandy's name to a Mount Baker High School student active in the school's music program. The funding for the scholarship includes the $25,000 the community raised to offer as a reward for information that led to the arrest of Mandy's killer. That money was donated to the scholarship fund. It might have taken 28 years, but Mandy Stavik's case was finally solved and she got justice. Her mother, Mary Stavik, was finally at peace, knowing that the person, or should I say monster, who took her daughter away from her was finally behind bars. This was the story of Mandy Stavik. So see you guys next time with another case, another story. If you are interested in knowing me more, you can follow me on Instagram on @asifity. Until then, take care, stay healthy and be awesome like you are.